Honourable members, the prayer. Lord, the God of righteousness and truth, grant to our King, to his government, to members of the Legislative Assembly, and to all in positions of responsibility, the guidance of your Spirit. May they never lead the province wrongly, through love of power, desire to please, or unworthy ideas, but laying aside all private interest and prejudice. Keep in mind their responsibility to seek to improve the condition of all. Amen. Amen. Honourable members, we will now be led in the singing of God Save the King by the Minister of Environment and Protected Areas. Please be seated.
Introduction of visitors. Introduction of guests.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Glenmore has a school group.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is my privilege to introduce grade 6 students from Calgary Jewish Academy in Calgary Glenmore. 17 of them, along with their teachers, Dorothy Gohar, Jessica Wren, and Gal Nussbaum. Please stand up and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
The Honourable Minister of Transportation has a school group. The Honourable Minister of Children and Family Services.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to introduce to you and to all members of the Assembly one of my most favorite schools from the town of Stony Plain, Meridian Heights, and they're led by their teacher, Liz Jespin. Please stand and accept the warm approval and applause from the Assembly.
The Honourable Member for Lethbridge West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you, I'd like to introduce my sister, Kathy White, and her friends Iris Barrington Lee and Jerome Sabo. Please rise and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
The Honourable Minister of Affordabilities and Utility.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to introduce to you and through you 6 recipients of the prestigious King Charles III Coronation Medal. Janet Ainsley, Evan Barry, Jason Bradley, Carl Johansson, Colette Turkerda, and Janine Sullivan. They are all outstanding individuals who have greatly contributed to the Alberta utility sector. Please rise and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
The member for Calgary Elbow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure today to introduce to you and through you to members of the Assembly, Miriam and Lee Obst. They have traveled here from Calgary Elbow to be here today because they are concerned about cutbacks for disabled Albertans and Inclusion Alberta. I would ask them to rise and receive the traditional warm welcome of this Assembly.
The Honourable Minister of Seniors, Community and Social Services.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to introduce you to several neighbours from Rimby, Rocky Mount House Sundry, including the Clearwater Regional Fire and Rescue Services members that are here, Bentley Fire Services and Eckville Fire Services, as well as the Christian Health Association of Alberta and their member organizations, including the Good Sam Society and the Bethany Group. I'd ask that they all rise and receive the traditional warm welcome of this Assembly.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Southwest.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure to introduce to you and through you the amazing board of the Glastonbury Community League that is celebrating their 20th year. Community League volunteers are the foundation of community. Please rise Chelsea Balzane, Brian Geislinger, Denise Forwick, Kimberly Johnson, Catherine Lowry, Rebecca Thompson to receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Bennington.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to introduce to you and through you my lovely family. Thank you guys for coming over spring break. Maybe mostly for the mall, but thanks for staying to hang out with me. Jonathan, Lizzie, Oliver, Arthur, please rise and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Gold Bar.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise and introduce 3 very special guests, my daughter Opal and her friends Megan and Sienna. They're here because it's spring break, and they're curious to find out if I'm actually as embarrassing as they're afraid that I am. I ask that they please rise and receive the traditional warm welcome of the Assembly.
My guess is more embarrassing. Are there others? The Honourable Minister of Technology and Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, I didn't see that he was here, but I see now my cousin's cousin, Ryan Hafsman, is here. I'd like to ask him to rise and receive the warm welcome to the Assembly. Mr. Speaker, the NDP may not like it, but he was the first person I called when I decided I wanted to be an MLA, and he's the one who gave me all the advice I needed to get started. So you can blame him for me being here. Nice to see you, Ryan.
Are there others? Seeing none, the clerk.
Ministerial statements. Member statements.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Decore has a statement to make.
Mr. Speaker, as Ramadan draws to a close, Muslim families and communities across Alberta and around the globe are preparing for the celebration of Eid al-Fitr, a day that marks the end of the month filled with faith, reflections, and self-discipline. It is anticipated to fall in either March 30th or 31st. The timing of the Eid al-Fitr is guided by the traditional sign of the new moon. Over the past 4 weeks, Alberta's Muslim community is engaged in fasting from dawn to sunset, dedicating their days for generosity, patience, and compassion. During this month, Muslim Albertans dedicated their evening to spend with families, with neighbors, and communities in the spirit of prayers and reflections. Eid al-Fitr is more than a festive occasion. It is a powerful expression of faith, community, and hope. These values, compassion, gratitude, and solidarity, are not only central to Islam, but are also core to who we are as Albertans. For many Muslim Albertans, it holds a deep personal and cultural significance. It fosters a strong sense of identity and belonging, something every Albertan deserves to feel. As representatives of diverse provinces, let us take this opportunity to extend our heartfelt Eid greetings to Alberta's Muslim community. Our shared future depends on recognizing and respecting the richness of our differences and celebrating them together. To Alberta's Muslim community, Eid Mubarak, Kullu Aam wa Antum Bikhair. To fellow Somali Albertans, Eid Wanaagsan, Kuwada Eida Afimatsan. Mr. Speaker, this Eid occasion is an opportunity for all of us to recommit building a province rooted in inclusion, dignity, and respect. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Leduc-Beaumont.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it must be tough times at the Alberta regional branch of the NDP these days. The head corporate office is going down in flames. Previously valued employees are jumping ship like sewer rats. The old boss, Thomas Monclair, is telling Canadians not to vote for their party. And their current boss, Jagmeet Singh, remember him, is practically invisible. Maybe he's taking notes from No Show Nenchi. Mr. Speaker, ouch. As a quick reminder, it's Jagmeet Singh that acts as the NDP boss. It's in their party's constitution. Not that Albertans could be blamed for being confused. After all, when former NDP MLA Rod Loyola recently resigned to run federally, he chose to take his communist sensibilities to copycat Carney and the federal Liberals. Truly a match made in Marxist heaven. So apparently, when the opposition says Team Canada, they actually mean Team Carney. In fact, I'm surprised Carney's face isn't on the shirts they're all wearing today. But should we really have been surprised? This NDP opposition has been in love with the federal Liberals for quite some time, fully supporting their efforts to systematically destroy our energy sector and lower our standard of living. It didn't have to be this way, Mr. Speaker. The impending demise of the federal NDP wasn't inevitable. We tried to warn them. Our government called on Jagmeet Singh to denounce Justin Trudeau and trigger an election much earlier, pointing out the obvious, that by integrating themselves so closely with Trudeau, Albertans and Canadians couldn't tell the difference between the Liberals and the NDP. But our advice fell on deaf ears. And because of that, the very existence of the NDP party may soon be in question. The members opposites are surely tearing themselves apart, asking, are you Team Carney or Team Singh? But the reality is, Mr. Speaker, if the opposition had simply decided to be on Team Alberta, they wouldn't be in this position.
member for Calgary Beddington.
Last week, my kids and I cheered on Rachel Homan as she led Team Canada to a decisive win in the Women's World Curling Championship. Next week, it'll be Alberta's men's curling team who will represent as Team Canada at the Worlds. I know, usually we talk about hockey in here, which is a shame because few sports are as quintessentially Canadian as curling. And Alberta has produced some of the finest curlers in the world. Chelsea Carey, Kevin Cooey, Cheryl Bernard, Kevin Martin, and Randy Furby, just to name a few. Curling is a sport known for being polite and respectful. What could be more Canadian than a sport that values teamwork, community, and inclusivity? When you listen to curling chatter, you'll hear phrases like, "Would you ever go for the freeze here?" or "Ankle race? I don't mind that." But don't be fooled, because underneath that civility is a cold, calculating, confident strategy. Knowing when to blank an end to get a fresh start, seeing all the angles so you can steal points when the other team has the advantage, or how to set a trap to force your opponents to take the risky shot. It's clear that our Premier hasn't been keeping up with this Canadian competition. For one, she never knows when to blank the end. Instead of admitting she's wrong, she doubles down, fishing around for a narrative that makes her latest scandal palatable and carries on even when it's clear that her approach is failing. And she's terrible at setting the trap. She's so busy blasting out her plans to any right-wing ideologue that will give her the time of day that even if she did have a strategy to address the current crisis, she'd have blathered it to the very people trying to tear us down before she had a chance to implement it. The Premier could use a refresher on what it means to be on Team Canada. I hope that she'll join me and my kiddos at the Curling Club. It's a great community, and she can learn some valuable lessons over a pint.
Member for Grand Prairie's next.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Canada's economy is under attack and has been for the last decade by the Liberal government in Ottawa. Their reckless policies and anti-industry agenda are choking Alberta's energy and forestry sectors to be able to grow and flourish by putting their time-intensive and red tape burdens upon our industries that drive our province and this country forward. Nowhere is this more evident than in the Upper Smoky sub-region. The federal government has continually tried to block responsible development, putting Alberta jobs at risk and increasing wildfire dangers. Ottawa refuses to acknowledge basic forest science. Trees grow old, trees die, and trees burn. In Alberta, we have made environmental stewardship a key priority, leading the way for decades. Our forestry industry follows a long-term plan, all of which must fit within over a 200-year forestry management plan, not reckless ideological roadblocks from Ottawa. There are only 3 ways a forest renews. It's harvested and replanted responsibly, it dies from age or a disease, or it burns. We have the expertise to renew forests, protect jobs, and safeguard our communities. Yet, instead of allowing Alberta to take care of its own land, the Liberal NDP coalition keeps throwing up roadblocks, making investment challenging, and leaving forests to become fire hazards. Mr. Speaker, Alberta is leading the way with real action. The Upper Smoky Sub-Regional Plan is a decisive step in striking the right balance to protect our environment while keeping people working. We don't need Ottawa's interference. We need Ottawa to get out of the way. Mr. Speaker, it takes boldness to lead. It takes boldness to have courage. It takes boldness to face these incredible odds and make decisions that are the very best for Alberta. On our side of the House, we have strong leadership from the Ministry of Environment and of Forestry that have made decisive decisions and actions in the Upper Smoky Sub-Regional Plan, which is essential to reducing forest fires. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Calgary Varsity.
One of the things that Canadians take pride in is public health care. It's far from perfect, but one way to improve it is to give up on things that are shown not to work. Yesterday, the Parkland Institute reported that between 2019 and 2024, public funding for for-profit surgical facilities in Alberta increased by 55%, and the per-procedure cost increased by 79%. Wow. Meanwhile, wait times across the system increased for 7 of 11 critical surgeries, including knee replacements, hip fracture repair, cardiac surgery, and all types of cancer surgery. At the same time, provinces with little reliance on chartered surgical facilities all had shorter wait times. Once a corporation has a monopoly, they jack up the price. We see that here. Or, as happened with Dynalife, they go bankrupt, leaving the public system to bail them out for millions of dollars. Corporate health care only provides what is cheap and easy. The goal is profit. Complex care and care to rural and remote areas costs more, so they are the first to go. Also, we have a limited number of care providers. If healthcare workers are drawn to work in private healthcare, we don't have them for what we need the most, for the emergency surgery for your child or your parent. Taking an American-style approach to healthcare won't get the results Albertans deserve. But that's what this Premier is demonstrating every day, as we see in this corrupt care scandal. She puts ideology ahead of results. We have to stop repeating the same mistakes. We need publicly funded, publicly delivered health care. The
honourable member for Calgary Elbow has a statement.
Mr. Speaker, earlier I introduced members of this House to Lee and Miriam Obst. Lee was a fighter pilot. He flew F-18s during the Cold War and kept Canadians safe from the Soviet threat. It meant a lot of risk for their family, time in far-flung places in Alberta and Canada, and postings to the then West Germany, where the Soviet hammer was expected to fall hardest. They risked their lives for us. But that's not why we're here today. They're here for their niece. Lee and Miriam rely on the Persons with Developmental Disabilities Program, or PDD, to obtain supports to take care of their niece. She's family. They love each other. And she needs care. PDD is an essential mechanism that allows people like the Obst's niece to receive care in a home setting outside of institutions, with a portion of the cost supported by the good people of Alberta. For developmentally disabled Albertans who receive care at home rather than in institutional settings, the supports are life-changing, Mr. Speaker. But the UCP makes these supports hard to access. Miriam and Lee met with Inclusion Alberta 7 times over the 3 months to discuss their appeal with PDD. Lee and Miriam don't know if they could have been successful in getting the resources their niece needs without their help. Inclusion Alberta's funding has also been cut, leaving it with fewer resources to assist others who are being denied vital resources. Lee and Miriam have a right to ask themselves what all their sacrifice was for. If their family can be treated so callously by a government that seems to act against the most vulnerable and helpless members of their family. They fought the Soviet Union only to have Soviet-style callousness and inhumanity hit them here, just like it's hitting the veterans at the Colonel Belcher facility. Everyone knows someone with a disability. Everyone with a disability is loved by someone. This isn't a story about one family's struggle, but a story about everyone in this province who is getting swept under the carpet, ignored and uncared for, while the UCP government manages to find hundreds of millions to fund corrupt care.
Presenting reports by standing and special committees, presenting petitions, notices of motions.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to give oral notice of Bill 49, the Public Safety and Emergency Services Statutes Amendment Act 2025, sponsored by the Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Services.
Honourable members, the time is now 1:50, and that makes it oral question period. And the Leader of His Majesty's Loyal Opposition has question number 1.
Mr. Speaker, we're wearing red and white today for Canada. When we see the members opposite wearing red and white, it's usually their MAGA hats. And we know that because we see former MPs and people close to the Premier launching a bid for Alberta to be annexed by the United States, and instead of shutting down this dangerous idea, the Premier encourages it. In the Medicine Hat newspaper, the Premier invited a citizen-led referendum on Alberta separating from Canada. At a time when Trump tariffs attack our jobs, economy and way of life, why is the Premier encouraging those who want Alberta to separate from Canada?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't think the Premier has done anything of the sort. What I can tell you the Premier has been doing is lobbying our neighbors to the south, legislators at the state and federal level, including secretaries, to make sure they understand the important relationship that Alberta has with the United States of America. Mr. Speaker, it's one thing to wear red, but don't talk about it, be about it. Be on Team Canada, be on Team Alberta.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, whether it's chemtrail conspiracies or Alberta separatism, this Premier embraces every outlandish idea put before her. And when she encourages those folks, the Premier appears to support separatism. In her UCP leadership election, the Premier embraced Western separatism put forward by none other than her current Chief of Staff. Why is the Premier so unwilling to stand up for our great country, whole, undivided, and united against American attacks? Why would the Premier threaten national unity crisis in the midst of a trade war?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as the Honourable Minister of Health would like to say, nothing could be further from the truth. Mr. Speaker, actions speak far louder than words, and as we speak, the Premier is making a case for Alberta with their neighbours down to the south. Mr. Speaker, what I can assure you is the Premier cares very deeply about national unity, and if the members want to dig deep in the repertoire of things done in the past, let's talk about Support Berman, somebody that they appointed to bring in here and consult on our energy sector. Mr. Speaker, they compared us to Mordor.
I might just remind the Government House Leader, but he wouldn't want to refer to the presence or the absence of a member for any purpose. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Trump tariffs are in place now, and Donald Trump is threatening more to come. And while Canadians are rallying behind the flag, seizing this moment to invest more in our country, to diversify our export markets, and to protect Canadian jobs, the Premier yet again flies to America and shares bread and a stage with those threatening our country. The Premier has no mandate to separate from Canada. Albertans are sick of her dalliance with extremists and those who are actively causing harm to our great nation. Why won't the Premier loudly denounce those outlandish calls to break apart our country?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, what the Premier has done is loudly denounce tariffs. It's the exact reason why she continues to travel across the U.S. border to meet with secretaries, state and provincial legislators. And the members talk about going to receptions. I've seen them at many receptions, Mr. Speaker. This business is about formal and informal engagements. They know that very well, and they know that when you go to these receptions, it's the time to talk about the important things that are facing stakeholders. Mr. Speaker, all Alberta are stakeholders, and we're here to defend them.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton-Whiteman has a question to ask.
Yesterday, the Premier stood in this House and actually asked Albertans to feel sorry for her because she has, quote, lost track of how many nights I've spent in uncomfortable hotel beds, end quote. Albertans aren't shedding a tear for a Premier who has been staying in fancy hotel rooms and attending cocktail parties and fundraisers in the U.S. for her American friends who want to annex our country, especially since she has nothing to show for all of these trips. So I'm wondering, is the Premier losing any sleep over the UCP's betrayal of Canada, or is it only cheap hotel beds in Florida that make her lose sleep?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can tell you that the Premier cares deeply about this province, and that the threat of tariffs, the threat of harm to our province is what would keep our Premier up at night. And what's keep her working 24 hours a day, Mr. Speaker, to make sure that we have our best interests represented across the line. I don't understand what the members opposite actually want. If the Premier doesn't go across the line to lobby on behalf of Alberta, they'll say she's doing nothing. If she goes over there, they're saying she's not defending Alberta. Mr. Speaker, if the Premier walked on water, they'd say she couldn't swim.
The Honourable Leader, the Member for Edmonton-Whiteman.
Mr. Speaker, what we want is a Premier who is on Team Canada. In the midst of a trade war Glenmore, the Premier's lost a cabinet minister, fired a caucus member, is in the middle of the worst corruption scandal in the province's history, and is passing a budget that doesn't support rural Alberta or prepare their communities for the impacts of tariffs on their farms or their businesses. While government MLAs will be driving home tonight on snowy highways to spend a week with angry and scared constituents, the Premier will be eating at a $1,500 per plate dinner in sunny Florida. Or wait, does the Premier actually know it's snowing in Alberta today, or is she too busy applying sunscreen and looking for her flip-flops?
Order. The honourable member for Edmonton Whitemud might be cautious about referring to the presence or the absence of a member, as is the government House Leader. The Honourable the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I completely reject the premise of the question, and there wasn't anything in there specifically about government business. But I'm glad the members opposite decided to bring up agriculture and defending our agriculture producers in this province, because it's not that long ago that they attacked the family farm in Alberta, Mr. Speaker, one of the bedrock of our province's economy. Mr. Speaker, the members opposite wanted to unionize the family farm. They had tractors out front of the legislature because of their ridiculous ideas.
The order. The honourable member for Edmonton Whitemud.
You can smell the desperation like a cheap cologne. This week, WestJet announced it is cancelling routes out of Calgary and Edmonton to the U.S. because Albertans are showing their patriotism by choosing to travel or vacation elsewhere. Well, most Albertans. Because there's one Albertan who loves traveling to the U.S., especially on the taxpayer dime. The Premier can't produce any notes or dates of her so-called meetings with U.S. decision makers, probably because, even as she admitted, they weren't meetings. They were of a social nature, which would explain why she has nothing to show for them. Certainly nothing for Alberta. So my question is for the government MLAs. How does it feel to know their constituents are patriot enough to cancel their vacations, but not their leader?
The Honourable, a point of order is noted at 157. The Honourable, the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, nobody knows desperation like the members opposite. I suspect they're seeing the same provincial polling numbers that we're seeing. Mr. Speaker, what I can tell you is that I will help the members opposite understand a little bit about how the United States works. You cannot meet with an incoming Secretary of State in the official capacity as Secretary of State or Secretary of anything without them being officially confirmed. Thus, some of those meetings were technically unofficial. But, Mr. Speaker, building relationships is important, because I can tell you they know her name, they know the Premier's name, they certainly don't know anyone across the aisle.
The order. The honourable member for Calgary, Boulard-McCall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On his show, Ben Shapiro stated, and I quote, "Islamic civilization is inferior to the West," end quote. The Premier is using taxpayer money to fundraise with the same Ben Shapiro for PragerU, an organization with a well-documented history of propagating hate and extremism. They even tried to get their hateful and Islamophobic videos into schools in front of young students. Wow. Why does the Premier and the UCP government find themselves so comfortable around people with such hateful and extreme views, such as Ben Shapiro?
The Honourable, the Government House Leader.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Premier has made it very clear that she will meet with anybody to make sure that we are continually selling Alberta's vision for the prosperous trade relationship with our neighbours to the south. What I can say is the member opposite has no idea what he's talking about when it comes to building relationships. On this side of the House, the Premier will continue to meet with elected officials at the state and federal level, including secretaries, to make sure they know how important our trade relationship is with the United States.
The honourable member for Calgary, Boulard-McCall.
Ben Shapiro openly supports President Trump's ban on immigrants and has stated this as well, that of banning all Muslim immigration also doesn't answer what do you do with the 3 million Muslims who are already here, end quote. Alberta is home to more than 200,000 Alberta Muslims, and many more are coming every year. Will the Premier state for the record that her government opposes such exclusionary policies and will never support any such policy for the province of Alberta?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure if this microphone is on, if the members opposite can hear me. But I've said it many times and I'll say it again. This government, and I hope all members of this chamber, I suspect, completely and unequivocally condone racism or discrimination of any condemn, Mr. Speaker. I apologize. I retract that. Of course, the members opposite would love to find humor in mistakes, Mr. Speaker. We condemn, absolutely condemn racism or discrimination.
Honourable order. The honourable member for Calgary-Buller-McCall.
The Premier and this government have stated that the fundraiser in Florida today will help end this trade war and tariffs. But Mr. Shapiro has accomplished nothing of that sort ever. There are tariffs just threatened today. In fact, the Premier is using taxpayer money to fundraise for an extremist and Islamophobic organization which will only help perpetuate hate and extremism in our communities. Will the Premier state for the record as a matter of government policy that this government stands against Islamophobia and condemns, not condones, PragerU and its hateful views?
There you go. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, we condemn extremism. Mr. Speaker, we will take no lessons from the members opposite about building relationships. The Premier continues to meet with legislators across the line to build those relationships. The only people the members opposite can call is probably Tzipora Berman, Rachel Notley, or Justin Trudeau, all failed politicians. Now this may be very difficult for the members to take. This is like a fire hose of facts, Mr. Speaker, hitting them fast. But I recommend the members drip dry and waddle their way back to reality.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton, Highlands, Norwood.
Tonight, the Premier will fundraise using Alberta taxpayer dollars for an extremist organization called PragerU. This group posted a video saying, quote, "Islam is not a religion of peace." Another video blames immigrant Muslim men from the Middle East, South Asia, and various parts of Africa for committing, quote, "crimes against girls and women, groping, harassments, assaults, and rape." Despicable. Tonight is the holiest evening for Muslims, Laylatul Qadr. So why is the Premier using taxpayer dollars to fundraise for this hateful organization?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Like I've said many times, Mr. Speaker, our government and all members of this chamber, I would suspect, condemn any form of extremism. The Premier continues to travel on behalf of the province and all Albertans to make the case that our trade relationship with the United States should remain tariff-free. I don't know why this is so difficult for the members opposite to understand. No, there's a lot of things that they don't understand. I'm happy to sit down when I have more than 35 seconds to explain it to them.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Islands, Norwood.
The Premier isn't going on the Ben Shapiro podcast. She's using taxpayer dollars to fundraise for PragerU. PragerU hosts videos calling the Me Too movement, quote, "a mechanism for witch hunts." They say women will have, quote, "unfettered permission to say something happened and you're going to believe them." Well, for the record, yes, on this side of the House, when women report sexual assault, we believe them. Why is the Premier fundraising for this hateful organization?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Again, Mr. Speaker, the Premier's across the United States border to plead the case for Alberta and the importance of our trade relationships. But if you want to talk about relationships and the things that people have said in the past, I would love to know why members of that side of the Assembly continue to defend things like calling Albertans the embarrassing cousins of Confederation, or calling Albertans sewer rats. Mr. Speaker, those are direct quotes from the members opposite. I can tell you right now, Mr. Speaker, Albertans down in my constituency, they don't appreciate that kind of language, but they do appreciate the work the Premier is doing.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Islands, Norwood.
Let's remember that fundraiser for PragerU was with Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro, the same person who called for Canada to be annexed, and now the Premier, she claims he's turned over a new leaf. Well, it sure ain't a maple leaf. The Premier claims that Shapiro is now on side and pushing a pro-Canada message to his audience. But if that's the case, why isn't the Premier's strategy working? Why are there new tariffs on Canadian goods, with more to come next week? Please explain.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Well, again, Mr. Speaker, I don't think I have enough time in 35 seconds to explain to the members opposite how tariffs work or how Confederation works and how we need help from the federal government, who is completely absent, who has called an election in the middle of a potential tariff war, Mr. Speaker. I think that they've been asleep at the wheel over there, or rather, sorry, asleep in the back seat. Heaven forbid they ever get the wheel again. Mr. Speaker, they have been asleep this entire time, not understanding that we need to work with our federal government and with the United States. But without one, our Premier has to take that leadership and fill that vacuum.
The honourable member for Calgary Acadia is next.
Healthcare professionals, especially women, immigrants, gender diverse workers, are fleeing their country because of Trump's policies and dangerous rhetoric. Alberta should be a safe place to live, but instead, the Premier is aligning herself with far-right extremists like Ben Shapiro by fundraising for PragerU. Does this UCP government realize that they are undermining Alberta's ability to recruit top talent by connecting our province to the same rhetoric that is driving these professionals away?
The Honourable the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, just because the Premier is meeting with Ben Shapiro doesn't mean she aligns with everything that person says. That's like saying they're all totally anti-energy because they hired Suporma Berman. Now, I do believe they are, but Mr. Speaker, what I can say is while the Premier continues to meet with influencers in the United States with millions and millions of followers on social media who listen and put pressure on their local and federal representatives, Mr. Speaker, what else do they want us to do?
The honourable member for Calgary Acadia.
Given that across the U.S., Donald Trump's administration is cancelling green cards without notice, sparking fear of detention and deportation, especially among immigrant healthcare professionals. Given that paramedics, nurses, pharmacists, and doctors are now looking for a welcoming, stable place to call home, but given if they see the Alberta Premier aligning herself with Trump's policies, far-right commentators, and having Alberta ministers wearing MAGA hats, these professionals will not come. Why is this government sending a message that Alberta is closed to the very healthcare professionals we need?
The Honourable Minister of Jobs, Economy and Trade.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And in fact, if the members opposite would focus on Alberta, they would realize that Alberta is attracting more professionals than ever before. 200,000 people relocated to Alberta. This is despite 4 years where the NDP told people to go work elsewhere. They told businesses, we don't want you, we're going to raise your taxes, we're going to make it harder to do business, we're going to see tens of billions of dollars go to the United States. That's after 4 years of them, but we've turned it around. People are coming here, including professionals, because we're the best place to live, work, and raise a family.
The honourable member for Calgary Acadia.
Given that the UCP government has been in power for 6 years, given that it's not just the Premier's dangerous rhetoric and far-right alliances that is hurting Alberta's ability to recruit healthcare workers, it's also this government's disastrous management of the healthcare system. And given that we've just learned the Minister of Health was demanding the former CEO of AHS to fire 1,900 AHS staff and slash nearly $1 billion of funding, these reckless cuts do not send a message of stability. They tell foreign-trained professionals to look elsewhere. How does this minister expect to attract talent when she's making Alberta's healthcare system a place where nobody wants to work?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, nothing could be further from the truth because we are, in fact, attracting more healthcare workers. We have more doctors coming to the province than ever before. We have over 12,200 doctors. When the members opposite were in power, they were in fact driving people away, and in fact we were losing healthcare professionals, Mr. Speaker. We are attracting more nurses. We are attracting healthcare aides. We are attracting more medical graduates. Mr. Speaker, we are on fire, and we're going to keep making sure that we have
Order. The honourable member for Saskatchewan-Vegreville has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the things I love about rural and small-town Alberta is the sense of community you share with those around you, even if your neighbours live miles away. The scattered nature of rural and agriculture community populations make the curling and hockey rinks, community centres, church and club halls more important for maintaining a sense of community and togetherness. To the Minister of Arts, Culture and the Status of Women, how is our government supporting vital community facilities in Alberta's small towns through Budget 2025?
The Honourable the Minister of Arts, Culture and the Status of Women.
Well, Mr. Speaker, thank you to the member for this important question and for continuing to be a fearless advocate for your community. Alberta's rural communities are vital to our province's identity and success, and we are committed to supporting their growth and prosperity. Since 2023, under our leadership, the Community Facility Enhancement Program has supported over 644 community projects, with about 1/3 of annual projects being funded in rural communities. And in Budget 2025, if passed, we maintain our record-level funding of $50 million for our CFEP program to continue supporting nonprofit organizations to build, upgrade, and sustain hundreds more community and cultural gathering spaces in every corner of the province.
The Honourable Member for Saskatchewan-Vegreville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that the Centennial Arena in the town of Two Hills was originally built in 1967, and given that this facility serves as an important purpose by hosting hockey games, 4-H shows, the Agri Days trade show, and the Run to the Hills rally, and given that earlier this year, I presented a nearly $1 million check to the Two Hills Agriculture Society for upgrades to this facility, to the same minister, what upgrades will the significant investment enable, and why is it so important for community life in Two Hills and the surrounding area?
Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Two Hills Agricultural Society aims to bring community neighbours together, create childhood memories, and improve the quality of life for the residents of Two Hills and the surrounding area. Our government is supporting this mission with significant investments that fund important and much-needed upgrades to the Two Hills Centennial Arena, including installing solar panels, constructing electric vehicle charging stations, and replacing the ice plant system for their ice rink. These improvements will make the facility more sustainable, reduce overhead costs, improve operational efficiency, and keep the facility accessible for all Albertans for generations to come.
The Honourable Member for Saskatchewan-Vegreville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And given that I also represent many other smaller municipalities like Minburn, Mundare, Manville, Lamont, Murnum, Lavoie, Josephburg, Andrew, Bruderheim, Chipman, Innisfree, and others, and given that those same municipalities and the areas that depend on them often need to rely on H facilities that need repair and upgrades, again to the same minister, what other investments has our government made recently to support the valued community organizations of the municipalities in the constituency of Fort Saskatchewan-Vegreville?
Honourable Minister of Arts and Culture.
Mr. Speaker, our CFIP grants support the unique needs of rural areas to help sustain the demand on their community gathering spaces by facilitating repairs, facility upgrades, equipment purchases, expansion projects, and more. Additional investments made by our government in the member's constituency include over $45,000 for the Mundare Recreation Centre, benefiting over 1,000 individuals, over $40,000 for the Lavoie Community Hall, benefiting over 1,000 individuals as well, over $32,000 for the Lamont Fish and Game Association, benefiting over 5,000 individuals, over $3,500 for the Two Hills Seniors Citizen Centre, benefiting over 1,500 individuals, just to name a few.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Klein.
Our economy is under threat, and extreme alt-right ideologues in the U.S. are musing about annexing Canada. Albertans demand that our government stand up for us, not Trump. But our Premier has asked the Trump administration to pause the tariffs, not because the tariffs are bad for our economy, but to interfere with our elections. She's excited to head to Florida to hang out with Ben Shapiro, the very extremist who thinks Canada should become the 51st state. Why won't the Premier get on Team Alberta? Because right now it looks like she's on Team Trump.
Yep. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to hit the members opposite with some more of that fire hose of facts. Fact, do nothing is not a strategy, Mr. Speaker. Fact, relationships make a difference, Mr. Speaker. In fact, the NDP have done nothing and continue to fail in their advocacy for the province of Alberta. I want to know, if they won't call anyone across the line to the United States and make the case for Alberta, will they at least call their boss, Justin Trudeau, or rather Jagmeet Singh and Mark Carney, and Justin Trudeau, who's probably now vacationing somewhere in Tofino, would they call him and at least ask them to stand up for Alberta? We're doing our part, they should do theirs.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Klein.
Given that the Premier has never missed an opportunity to build relationships with the extreme alt-right, and given that the Premier's selfie tours, party primping, and other embarrassing attempts to ingratiate herself to the wrong people have done zero to avoid tariffs, and given that at a time of unprecedented economic uncertainty, we need our leaders sitting with decision makers, not influencers from Telegram, will the Premier commit to collaboration with Team Canada instead of wasting public money fundraising for the extreme alt-right in Florida?
The Honourable the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, wearing a Canada shirt or wearing a Canada tie or putting on a red shirt doesn't mean that you're on Team Canada. Actions speak much louder than words, Mr. Speaker, and I can tell you that on this side of the House, every single one of the ministers on the front bench and the private members all advocate with the stakeholders. We advocate with those across the United States border to make sure they understand the importance of our relationship with the United States. The members opposite have refused to do that. Instead, they just throw stones across the aisle. Do nothing is not a strategy.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Acadia.
Given that the Premier has repeatedly refused to work with other provinces and build relationships with them, skipped the in-person First Ministers meeting and wasn't even invited to the Canada-US Summit, and given that the Premier delivers ultimatums under the threat of a national unity crisis to the new Prime Minister instead of finding ways to help Albertans, and given that the UCP has long pandered to separatists while deriding Team Canada and has now gone so far as to tell other countries how to interfere in our elections, will the Premier admit that the national unity crisis she speaks of comes from within her government and nowhere else?
Yes, it does. The Honourable the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, again, I repeat that the key part of the Premier's U.S. advocacy is advancing Alberta and Canada's message with the American people. Mr. Shapiro has millions of followers on social media and strong connections within the Republican Party. Why would we not have a conversation with Ben Shapiro when he has those millions of followers that can help us advocate with the President, state and federal legislators on behalf of the government of Alberta? Mr. Speaker, members opposite know nothing about relationships. They broke every relationship they have, whether it's the oil and gas sector within their government or
the Honourable Member for Banff, Kananaskis.
Mr. Speaker, this week the Premier read from a long list of influencers she's met with in the States. Doesn't matter if they're racist or Islamophobic or want to annex Canada. It's okay because they're influencers. But influencers are not decision makers or politicians. They're big egos, talking heads, and pretty faces, and a chat with one does not change government policy. Where's the Premier getting her negotiating tips? TikTok? What are Albertans getting for the endless stream of yearbook selfies with influencers?
The Honourable the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, the members opposite know all about TikTok. It's the only way that they can actually get their message out, because their leaders out somewhere in the building around shooting those kind of TikTok videos that, I hate to break it to them, Mr. Speaker, nobody's watching. But, Mr. Speaker, we did talk, the member opposite just mentioned a list of people the Premier has met, and I will go through some of those people, Mr. Speaker. U.S. governors, Texas Governor Greg Abbott, Montana Governor Greg Giforte.
Order. The Honourable the Government House Leader.
Nevada Governor Joe Lombardo, North Dakota Governor Kelly Armstrong, Wyoming Governor Mark Gordon, Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders, Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry, Utah Governor Spencer Cox.
The Honourable Member for Banff, Kananaskis.
Well, given the Premier has said that she's met with some decision makers, I'll grant you that, even though we know through estimates debate that these were run-ins at a cocktail party. And given when these interactions do happen, the lack of results speak for themselves. Given that after meeting the governor of Montana told Trump that the route to Canada as the 51st state is through Alberta, and Alberta will be the first to crumble. Excuse me? Why would the Premier ever think what she's doing is working? Why has she failed to protect Canada's
The Honourable the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, like I said, do nothing is not a strategy unless you're the NDP, because they have nothing. Mr. Speaker, you want to talk about results? Let's talk about the election results just recently in 2023. It's why the members are opposite. Albertans know they have no plan. But I'll continue along this list of people that the Premier has met with, and that goes along with Colorado Governor Jared Polis, Hawaii Governor Josh Green, New Mexico Governor Michelle Grisham. Now, of course, let's talk about industry stakeholders as well, like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, including President of the Global Energy Institute, Martin Durbin, Chet Thompson, CEO of
The Honourable Member for Banff Kananaskis.
Mr. Speaker, how many of those governors are also telling President Trump that Alberta will be the first to fall? This is very scary for me, and I am not the only one. Given tariffs are still coming, Albertans are nervous and scared, and rather than comfort or assure them, we have chaos, corruption, and cuts. Given we have yet to see the Premier announce any programs or supports for Alberta ranchers, small businesses, or anyone who is about to be dramatically affected by these tariffs, when will the Premier show up for Albertans like she's showing up for American influencers and Team Trump?
The Honourable Government Health Leader.
I find the 3 C's of the NDP funny, but how about this? Debt, deficit, and dumb decisions. That's what characterizes the members opposite, Mr. Speaker. In the 4 years that they were in government, they racked up tens of billions of dollars of debt, saddling that on the backs of Albertans in the future. But, Mr. Speaker, what I can tell you is on this side of the House, we believe in a strong economy and a tariff-free relationship with the United States of America. That's why the Premier has met with multiple U.S. federal stakeholders, including Congressman Bruce Westerman, Congressman Scott Peters, Congressman Adrian Smith, Michael Waltz, National Security Advisor of the United States. Mr. Speaker.
Order. The Honourable Member for Edmonton Rutherford.
Alberta's Premier has her tinfoil hat on again. The Premier says maybe those are chemtrails. The Premier says maybe Alberta should separate. The Premier says maybe I should go talk conspiracies in Florida. And the Premier most recently was caught asking foreign countries to interfere in our federal election. The rest of Canada wants to go elbows up, and she's got her head you know where, headed to Florida. When will our Premier stay home and start working for Albertans?
To interrupt, but I have said it at 2 occasions about referring to the presence of or absence of a member. I encourage members of the Assembly to follow the rules of it. The Honourable the Government Health Leader. The Honourable Minister of Jobs, Economy and Trade.
Mr. Speaker, when Nahid Nenshi was appointed as leader of the NDP, he must have thought he'd been called worse by better people. And his own members don't feel any better about him. They wouldn't step aside to allow him to run in Calgary. He was too afraid to run in Lethbridge.
Order, order, order. We've heard you many occasions. The Honourable Minister of Jobs, Economy and Trade.
He was too afraid to run in Lethbridge, and now we know why, Mr. Speaker. The polling is disastrous. I almost want to step down just so he has somewhere to run and lose right now.
Order. The Honourable Member for Edmonton Rutherford.
Given that I have constituents asking me if the Premier cares more about Republicans than she does about Albertans, which is hard to deny when she signed up for a swimming time with Ben Shapiro in Florida, and given that the Premier is confused and thinks that meeting with extreme far-right conspiracy theorists and asking for foreign election interference is synonymous with standing up for Albertans, which it is not, so I ask my colleagues, do they really believe that far-right fundraising in Florida is what Albertans want from their Premier?
I'm not sure if the Honourable Member is aware, the point of question period isn't to ask members what they believe or don't believe. It's to ask them about what is government policy. I've heard very few questions today about government policy, and I think I've been more than lenient. The Honourable the Government House Leader.
Well, Mr. Speaker, first I want to address the first question that the member asked, which was full of inaccuracies and frankly just outright disrespectful. I want to ask that member, did your constituents elect you to come into this chamber and speak to your colleagues like that and represent them? I thought that was so disrespectful to say the Premier has her head, you know where, Mr. Speaker. Completely disgusting. Absolutely disgusting, Mr. Speaker. What I can tell you is what Albertans want is a Premier that respects the Alberta population, not one that says that Albertans driving an F-350 are cavemen, Mr. Speaker. Let me tell you, those F-350 drivers, they're moving cattle, they're moving horses down in my constituency. They deserve respect too.
Point of order is noted at 2:22. Perhaps all members might like to take a big deep breath. Focus on the future of the province. The honourable member for Edmonton Rutherford.
Mr. Speaker, given that the UCP's job should be recognizing the sovereignty of Indigenous peoples alongside protecting Canadian sovereignty, given that far-right extremists like Ben Shapiro want to annex Canada, making it an outlying U.S. territory, and given that such an act would violate the rights of all Indigenous peoples in Canada, this is harmful rhetoric being spewed by the far-right extremists, and the Premier's willingness to ignore the rights of Indigenous peoples is offensive. Will the minister denounce this harmful rhetoric?
The Honourable the Minister of Indigenous Relations.
Mr. Speaker, I meet with Indigenous groups daily, and we are very concerned about their sovereignty, and we talk about it a lot. And this government supports and respects our Indigenous people so much, Mr. Speaker, and the Premier especially. She's asked me to make sure that we work on everything from Jordan's Principle. It's right in my mandate letter on Jordan's Principle that we make sure everyone is looked after, no one is left behind, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Edmonton West Henday.
Mr. Speaker, there is nary a person across the aisle that speaks with the First Nations as sovereign nations in the country of Canada. A Team Canada approach must recognize the sovereign First Nations that entered into treaty on these territories and who are original partners in Confederation. Yeah. That side of the House forgets about the rights of Indigenous peoples when it comes to the threats of us becoming the 51st state. Does the Minister of Indigenous Relations understand that treaty supersedes all laws on these territories? And will he commit to First Nations today that we will never be the 51st state?
Order. 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 The Minister of Indigenous Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, Mr. Speaker, I meet regularly with First Nation people, and just yesterday we met with the Grand Chief of Treaty 8, an amazing man. We're working so close with him, and he's wanting to work with this government. We have protocol tables with many of the First Nations, and now we're working on an accord table with Treaty 8. Never done on that side, Mr. Speaker, for sure. We make sure that all of our First Nation people get a chance to work with all of our ministers one-on-one and with the Premier. And that's the relationship that we've developed by working hard to make sure that we understand each other.
The Honourable the Member for Edmonton West Henday.
Given that First Nations like the Sturgeon Lake Cree Nation and the Confederacy of Treaty 6 First Nations, which you have a relationship agreement with, Minister, and the nations of Musqueam wrote this government that they are violating the Articles of Treaty. And given that the threat of annexation flies in the face of sovereignty for those First Nations, will the Minister commit today to the nations that he will make sure Alberta will not become the 51st state? I haven't heard you say that. And will you commit to being on Team Canada right now by promising to hold treaty promises? Yes or no, Minister?
The Honourable Minister of Indigenous Relations.
As I've said, Mr. Speaker, we work very closely with our First Nation people, and just this morning we met with our Métis brothers and sisters, the Métis settlements, Mr. Speaker. We're working so close with them, we're developing a relationship with them, we're developing protocol tables with them as well, because we want to make sure that they have a voice, and we make sure that every minister works with them, the Premier works with them, to make sure that our Indigenous brothers and sisters are part of our government, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton West Henday.
given we have a crisis facing our women, girls, and Two-Spirit Plus people, but given that instead of solving this crisis, the Premier will travel back to Florida to soak up the rays and meet with an anti-Muslim, anti-queer, anti-woman racist. And given that if any of my aunties ever heard what Ben Shapiro has said come out of my mouth, they would have given me a good lesson in respect. Will the minister commit to disowning the Premier's actions, or will he continue to ignore the crisis facing our women, girls, and Two-Spirit Plus people with these actions?
The Honourable Minister of Indigenous Relations.
Mr. Speaker, we work so closely with our Indigenous brothers and sisters. We've developed the Premier's Council to work with missing murder Indigenous women and girls. They work directly with the Premier. We've developed a pathway forward to make sure that that voice is not mistaken. And we've just worked with a group to develop an app, Mr. Speaker, so that you can go online and see how many women and children have gone missing. And the numbers are terrifying, Mr. Speaker. And that's why many of the ministers here are working on this problem to make sure that that voice doesn't go unheard. And Mr. Speaker, you always see me wear my red dress, and that's just to bring awareness. So people come and they ask me, what's this all about? And it gives me the opportunity to explain to them what that's all about.
Honourable members, a point of order is noted at 2:28. The Honourable Member for Red Deer South.
Mr. Speaker, Canada could be the most prosperous nation on earth, but many are watching their standard of living getting destroyed, feeling helpless to do anything to stop it. For a long time, Canada has been broken, and we cannot trust these politicians to fix what they broke. To the minister, how is Canada undermining Alberta on GDP per capita, foreign investment, and taxes?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, thank you to the member for the question. Alberta is doing better than any other province when it comes to measures such as GDP per capita, investment attraction, tax competitiveness, and most other economic indicators. We have a corporate tax rate lower than that of 44 U.S. states, and we consistently rank in the top echelon of provinces and states when it comes to productivity. But as I've said many times, unfortunately, that merely makes us the fastest skater on a slow team. The very best thing for a strong Canada economically is a strong Alberta.
The Honourable Member for Red Deer South.
Given Canada is currently suffering under economic warfare, yet, Mr. Speaker, given Alberta has already suffered economic warfare under Trudeau Singh for many years, given Team Canada did nothing or enabled or supported this warfare on Alberta, given some on Team Canada are now calling for export taxes for Alberta, using us as their sacrificial lamb, to the minister, why should Albertans trust some on Team Canada?
Order. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Alberta is the economic engine of Canada, and we are better as part of a united Canada. But we need the rest of Canada to support us in getting our resources to new markets. I was heartened in a recent PT meeting, provincial territorial meeting, with other finance ministers to have unanimous consent from coast to coast to coast on abolishing Bill C-69, the No More Pipelines Act that the NDP Liberal coalition brought in.
Member for Red Deer South.
Given Albertans voted in a referendum to get rid of equalization, and given the Premier of Quebec said one of his favourite things about Canada is equalization, and given Albertans were ignored, and given the Quebec Bloc calls Alberta oil dirty, seeking to block pipelines, and given Alberta is again being attacked in this election, to the minister, if we do not have Albertans' backs, who will?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you to the member for the question. We have Albertans' backs. We make sure they pay $20 billion less in taxes than any other province. We're bringing in more investment than any other province. We have the highest wages, the fastest growing economy, the best and most innovative energy and agriculture sectors anywhere in the world. And it's time that the rest of Canada sees that and supports us. The very best thing for a strong Canada economically is a strong Alberta.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Riverview has a question to ask.
Since I celebrated Canada's centennial in 1967, I've had a strong love for my country from an early age when I was 6 years old. Canadians across this country are feeling that same love now due to the attacks from the President of the United States. So how can the Premier abandon fellow Canadians by attending a fundraiser for an extreme alt-right U.S. podcaster and generally go rogue rather than being on Team Canada with the other premiers?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier has been very clear. We are on Team Canada. We're just asking that Team Canada be on Team Alberta. And when Prime Minister Carney was here not that long ago, the Premier made a very clear pitch of what we expect going forward, and that is guaranteeing Alberta full access to unfettered oil and gas corridors to the north, east and west, repealing Bill C-69 and lifting the tanker ban off the coast of BC, Mr. Speaker. This is real leadership. The Premier is standing up for Alberta's best interests. Why won't the members opposite do the same?
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Riverview.
Given that the last time the Premier sat down with an extreme far-right media outlet, Breitbart, she called on the Trump administration to interfere in Canada's federal election, asking for a pause in tariffs so Pierre Poilievre could catch up in the polls. A pause, just so Trump could hit us harder later. Given that Albertans deserve a Premier who advocates for us, not Trump, will the Premier stop aligning Alberta with extreme far-right hate groups and cancel her fundraiser?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think the Premier or I or any other member of this caucus could be more clear. We believe in a tariff-free relationship with the United States. That is also why we have made a pitch, an appeal to Prime Minister Mark Carney that we have expectations, including eliminating the oil and gas emissions cap, which is effectively a production cap, Mr. Speaker, scrapping the so-called clean energy regulations, ending the prohibition on single-use plastics, and abandoning the net zero car mandate, Mr. Speaker. These are all not in Alberta's best interest. It's why she's bringing that to the Prime Minister's attention.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Riverview.
This is not a public event. It's a $1,500 a plate fundraiser for an extreme far-right propaganda outlet. And given that the last time the Premier sat down with one of these groups, she lobbied for foreign interference into our democracy. And given that record, Albertans can't trust what she's saying behind closed doors. Will the Premier commit to making all remarks made at this private fundraiser public so Albertans can be certain she won't further betray Canada?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I would start with the point of order. The second thing is that the only people that are betraying Canada are the members opposite who refuse to stand up for Alberta. Mr. Speaker, a strong Alberta is good for Canada. A strong Saskatchewan is good for Canada. A strong Nova Scotia is good for Canada. That's why we're on Team Canada. We're asking Canada to be on Team Alberta, which would include returning oversight of the industrial carbon taxes to the provinces and halting the federal censorship on energy companies, Mr. Speaker. Why won't the members opposite get on side?
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Beverly Clairview.
Mr. Speaker, workers in Edmonton Beverly Clairview are worried, and so they should be. This Premier's so-called diplomatic strategy isn't about protecting workers, it's making them more vulnerable. I've seen my share of bullies, and one thing is clear, appeasement doesn't work. That just invites more attacks. Albertans look to government to lead when times are tough, but this government is embroiled in corrupt care, shady deals, and dodgy friendships. Cozying up to America's far right isn't standing up for Alberta, it's incompetence, and it's selling us out. When will this government stop pandering to extremists and start fighting for Alberta's workers?
The Honourable Minister of Jobs, Economy and Trade.
Mr. Speaker, we fight for workers every day, and we're doing that with Team Canada. We're working to address internal barriers to trade, and we're also trying to improve labour mobility across the country. We're working on a mutual recognition pilot to make trucking easier across Canada. That, of course, will support workers and jobs. We're working to finalize the financial services chapter of the Canadian Free Trade Agreement. Again, that will support economic activity and workers. And we continue to have the most business-friendly, job-friendly environment, low tax, low regulation, highest earnings in Alberta, thanks to this government.
The honourable member for Edmonton Beverly Clareview.
Given that more than a third of Alberta workers say they are afraid they'll lose their jobs because of tariffs, given that other provinces have already stepped up to support and protect workers, more retraining programs, helping businesses find new markets, accelerating priority projects so jobs are safe, given some provinces also created trade councils that include representation from Indigenous leaders, labour, industry, councils that focus on defending workers and their jobs. Mr. Speaker, why can't the same be said about this UCP government? Where's Alberta's task force? Where's Alberta's plan? Where are the voices of Albertan workers?
The Honourable Minister of Jobs, Economy and Trade.
Since the beginning of this situation, Alberta has been meeting with industry and stakeholders of all groups. We have the Alberta Trade Advisory Council that has met multiple times. This has representation from all of the major industries, manufacturing, agriculture, energy, all the chambers of commerce. We're just adding Calgary Economic Development, Edmonton Global, and other related organizations. And we are taking their advice on U.S. tariffs and their impacts on the proposed counter tariffs and how we can best target those and how we can work together and make Canada freer trading internally and removing those barriers again to internal trade and labour mobility.
The honourable member.
Given that I didn't hear anything about labour and Indigenous leaders, given that workers show up and work hard to support their families, but are being left to fend for themselves by a government more concerned with pictures and parties with influencers, given the company you keep is a choice, given the Premier's actions undermine Team Canada's strategy and do nothing to help Albertans, given that these public embarrassments on the world stage are in fact isolating Alberta from both domestic and international partners, when will the Premier and this government finally put workers first and abandon this reckless alliance with Team Trump?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And this government's been working very hard to make sure that our Indigenous folks are getting those same opportunities everyone else is. That's why we developed what we call the Aboriginal Business Investment Fund, Mr. Speaker. Just that one program alone, since I've been a minister, we've created over 1,000 full-time jobs for Indigenous people across Alberta. Mr. Speaker, when I move into communities now, I see the difference. I see the pride in people's faces. I know one community I worked with when I first started, they had 2 employees, Mr. Speaker. Now we've got 150 full-time employees, and it's just amazing what's happening.
Member for Taber-Warner.
Mr. Speaker, on March 8th, China announced tariffs on many Alberta products in retaliation to the Liberal government's imposed levies on Chinese electric vehicles, steel and aluminum products. Alberta products that China has imposed tariffs on include canola oil, peas and pork. This escalation in trade tensions has already significantly impacted bilateral trade and will continue to do so while these tariffs remain in place. To the Minister of Jobs, Economy and Trade, how have the ongoing Chinese tariffs on Alberta and Canada's influenced trade relations?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Alberta's economy is built on strong trade relationships with our trading partners, and these tariffs have consequences on key industries, both in Alberta and abroad. China's 100% tariffs on canola oil, meal, and peas, along with 25% on pork, fish, and seafood, will directly impact our producers. Last year alone, Alberta exported over $400 million in canola oil and over $138 million in dried peas to China. The uncertainty these tariffs create for business disrupts supply chains and reduces market confidence. But we're committed to working with federal and international partners to protect our economy, diversify trade, and maintain global market access.
The Honourable Member for Taber-Warner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And thank you to the Minister. Given the rising tensions and trade barriers, not only between the Liberals and China, but also the U.S., and given that the President and CEO of the Canola Council of Canada has said that these tariffs are going to have a widespread and negative impact across the Canadian canola industry, to the same Minister, how will these tariffs on Canadian goods affect the competitiveness of our industry in the global market?
The Honourable Minister of Jobs, Economy and Trade.
Mr. Speaker, tariffs threaten Alberta's competitiveness at a time when global markets are already shifting. Alberta's exports to China have grown at an average rate of 7.1% over the last 5 years, and we need to ensure that these new tariffs don't slow down our momentum. Canola alone is a $30 billion industry for Canada, supporting thousands of good-paying jobs. That's why we're focused on market diversification, expanding export opportunities, enhancing value-added production, increasing domestic usage, and ensuring that Alberta's producers remain globally competitive. So we'll continue to advocate for fair trade conditions to protect our agriculture sector. Thank you.
The honourable member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and again to the Minister for that response. Given that China is our second largest trading partner behind the United States, and further given that economic and geopolitical complexities between the two have grown because of the imposed tariffs from both the Chinese government and the federal Liberals, to the same minister, what role could these tariffs play in shaping Canada's trade policy and future negotiations with China in the long run?
Good question.
The honourable minister.
Mr. Speaker, China is Alberta's second largest trading partner, and diversifying trade is essential for our long-term stability. Our exports to China were valued at $6.73 billion last year, and that's why we're committed to strengthening trade relationships domestically and globally with other partners through internally our agreements like the New West Partnership and the Canadian Free Trade Agreement, while also supporting infrastructure development and trade missions that will help our businesses export their products to internally and to additional international markets. The focus remains on securing new opportunities, ensuring new market access, and protecting Alberta's position as a global leader in agriculture trade.
Good job. Honourable members, that concludes the time allotted for oral question period. In 30 seconds or less, we'll continue with the remainder of the daily routine. Order. Order. Go ahead, Shannon.
Introduction of bills.
The honourable member for Lethbridge West.
Introduce Bill PR5, Community Foundation of Lethbridge and Southwestern Alberta Act. Mr. Speaker, the Community Foundation of Lethbridge and Southwestern Alberta was established in 1966 and has built their endowment funds to more than $41 million with the intent to support our community forever. The foundation serves southern Alberta from Vulcan County south to the U.S.-Canada border and from the MD Tabor west to the BC border. Thank you.
Honourable members, the Honourable the member for Lethbridge West has moved first reading of Bill PR5, Community Foundation of Lethbridge and Southwest Alberta Act. All those in favour of first reading, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. In my opinion, the ayes have it. That motion is carried and so ordered.
Bill PR5, Community Foundation of Lethbridge and Southwestern Alberta Act is now read a first time.
The Honourable Member for Lacombe-Panoka.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise to request leave to introduce Bill PR6, Burman University Act 2025. Thank you.
Honourable members, the Honourable Member for Lacombe-Panoka has moved first reading of Bill PR6, Burman University Amendment Act 2025. All those in favour of the motion for first reading, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. In my opinion, the ayes have it. That motion is carried and so ordered.
Bill PR6, Burman University Amendment Act 2025 is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports.
The Honourable Member, are there tablings? The Honourable Member for Edmonton-McQuang.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to table 5 copies of an article from today's Calgary Herald heralding ongoing diversification efforts by Alberta companies while the Premier focuses on maximizing shipments of unrefined crude oil along with thousands of jobs downstream.
Member for Cypress Medicine Act.
I've been tabling today from the Bureau titled Fool Me Once, the cost of Carney-Trudeau tax games, and the impact that they will have on everyday Canadians.
Are there other tablings? Whoa. The Honourable Clerk.
Tablings to the Clerk, deferred divisions.
Honourable members, that brings us to points of order. And at 1:57, the member for Red Deer South rose on a point of order. We'll consider that withdrawn.
Mr. Speaker, but I'll bet it was a point of order.
I guess we will never know. At Unless there's somebody else that wants to argue it on his behalf, the honourable member for Bonnyville Cold Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The question that was asked and questioned during that time was a question to everybody within the House. That is not normally the process that this House follows. They ask a specific minister at the time to be able to respond. Again, this is 23 H, I, and J. Thank you.
The opposition House Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I do not believe this is a point of order. The member did not make reference to any allegations, false motives, or abusive or insulting language, although he cited 23 H, I, and J. And so I hope you rule it not a point of order, and we move on to constituency break soon.
The honourable member for Bonnyville Cold Lake St. Paul may have not referenced paragraph 409, section 6 of Beauchesne's, where it says that oral questions must be within the administration competence of the government, or he may not have referenced House of Commons Procedures and Practice, page 510, where it says oral questions must not seek information of a purely personal nature, or page 509 of House of Commons Procedures and Practice says any questions relating to government policy should be directed and answered by a member of Executive Council, or page Beauchesne's 409 subsection 4 where it says oral questions should not be frivolous. Well, he may, there is a couple more ors in fact, well, he may not have done that. On more than one occasion, the Speaker did provide caution to members of the official opposition, and in a small twist of irony, perhaps the honourable member for Red Deer South could heed his own advice in his questioning today as well. But I think we would all be well served if members of the Assembly continue or revert to using oral question period what its intention is, and that is to not ask frivolous questions, to ask questions within the competency of the minister, and to ask questions within the confines of what the provincial government is responsible for. I consider this a strong caution to all members of the Assembly. Honourable members, at 2:21, the Government House Leader rose on a point of order.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. At the time noted, at 2:21, I rose on a point of order when the member from Edmonton Rutherford was speaking, asking a question to the government. In the question, which was riddled with inaccuracies but also offensive language, there's a couple that I will specifically note. The first one, saying that the Premier was wearing a tinfoil hat. Now, I think my unofficial record here would say the Premier has her tinfoil hat on again, which is ridiculous, but nonetheless the member said it. But I will say, Mr. Speaker, what really gets me here is the second line when they said, when referring to the Honourable Premier, she's got her head you know where. Now, Mr. Speaker, this kind of language is reprehensible. And I don't know who the member opposite is trying to cater to, using language like that, speaking to anyone in this chamber, let alone the Honourable Premier. Each member of this Assembly deserves respect. We were all duly elected by our constituents, whether I like it or not. The members opposite have every right to be here as much as we do in terms of our election results, and we all deserve that respect. And Mr. Speaker, we recently dealt with a point of privilege that was addressed just like that, which was followed up by a very sincere and much appreciated apology. I wish the member from Edmonton Rutherford would take lessons from the member from Edmonton Whitemud on how to issue an apology, because this is disgusting.
The Honourable Opposition House Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would agree with the Government House Leader only a tiny little bit. I do think that, certainly in reference to the tinfoil hat, that the member for Edmonton Rutherford may have gotten a little too enthusiastic. But certainly she answered the question that she was referring to the Premier being in Florida, and that was clear in the record. That being said, I will cede the floor to my honourable colleague, who I believe will apologize and withdraw.
I might just say, perhaps I'm surprised by such language, and maybe for the benefit of the Assembly, you'll confirm what the intention was by, or where you were implying the Honourable Premier's head may have been in your apology.
I apologize and withdraw.
I'll consider this matter dealt with and concluded. However, I do find the language and the implication, I don't know what you could have been implying about where her head was, but it is certainly unbecoming of a member of this Assembly. Immediately following that, the Honourable Deputy Official Opposition House Leader rose on a point of order.
We heard that question may have gone too far, but Minister, when responding to the same answer, also went quite far and made personal attacks to the member that, oh, that's what constituents sent him to represent here or say here. If question was not that great, I think Minister's answer was also not that great, that respectful, and certainly the things that Minister accused member of, they were also offside 23H, I, and J.
Yeah. Well, Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, my unofficial records of my own remarks say as follows. Did your constituents elect you to come to this chamber and speak to your colleagues like that and represent them? I thought that was so disrespectful to say that the Premier has her head you know where, Mr. Speaker. That's my unofficial records. I will defend this Premier every day. And to hear that kind of language is, again, reprehensible in this chamber. That is why I said what I said. It was not a personal attack. It was a question to the member opposite, asking the member to stand or at least to defend her remarks if the member truly believes that that kind of language is becoming of a member of the Legislative Assembly of Alberta.
I do have the benefit of the blues, and I am prepared to rule in light of the fact that the honourable member has apologized and withdrawn for her comment that were unparliamentary. I think it's difficult to make the argument that they weren't or that the member went too far. I would say this language got elevated. What he failed to say is, I thought that it was so disrespectful to say the Premier had her head you know where, which we've established was in fact a point of order, but he then went on to say completely disgusting, absolutely disgusting, and I can see why the honourable member for Edmonton or Calgary Boular McCall raised the point of order, although that's not a point of order, and so I consider the matter dealt with and concluded. Honourable members, at 2:28, I believe, is the next point of order.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I rise on point of order 23H, I, and J at the time noted. The member from Edmonton West Henday was speaking. I probably need glasses soon. And he said at the time, the Premier, and this is paraphrasing, of course, and trying to read my own handwriting, the Premier is meeting with anti-women, anti-Muslim racists. You certainly cannot do indirectly what you cannot do directly and suggest that the Premier is anti-woman, anti-race, anti-woman, racist, anti-Muslim. But also, this has been ruled out of order in the past, talking about the Premier meeting with people who are racist, xenophobic, anti-Muslim, etc., etc. It's not parliamentary, Mr. Speaker. I do believe, based on past rulings, that this would be a point of order under 23H, I, and J.
The Opposition House Leader, the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I disagree with the Government House Leader. To my knowledge, referring to someone meeting with people who, it is a matter of debate, the words that they have said have been xenophobic, Islamophobic, anti-women, as we heard with direct quotes from the record of Ben Shapiro. This is a matter of debate, a matter of public record. All things have been proven in this room with, again, that person's own quotes. I do not think that this is a point of order. The Premier has chosen to go to a fundraising event and meet with and share a stage with an individual who has this record. I believe the Government House Leader is continuing debate in this point of order. It is not a point of order. I look forward to your ruling, Mr. Speaker.
I do have the benefit of the blues, and I am prepared to rule unless there are other submissions. Honourable members, the member for Edmonton West End said the following: given that we have a crisis facing our women, girls, two-spirited plus people, and given that instead of solving this crisis, the Premier will travel to Florida and soak up the rays and meet with anti-Muslim, anti-queer, anti-women, racist, and given that my aunties would have said what Ben Shapiro had said come out of my mouth, they would have given me a good listen and respect, and a point of order was called. He then went on to say, will the minister disavow the Premier's actions, or will he ignore the crisis facing women, girls, two-spirited in these actions? I'm of the opinion that at no point in time did the member imply that the Premier was those things, but an individual that she was meeting with was. Now, I think that because we have absolute rights and privileges in the Assembly, doesn't mean that those don't come without responsibility. And speaking aggressively about members of the public who don't have their ability to defend themselves has risen to the level of a point of order on occasion in the past in this Assembly. I don't think that's the case here today. The member has those rights. It certainly didn't imply that the Premier was those things, and so I consider this a matter of debate and not a point of order. I consider the matter dealt with and concluded. At 2:36, the Honourable Government House Leader also rose on a point of order.
Draw.
I consider the matter dealt with and concluded as it has been withdrawn. Honourable members, we're at orders of the day, orders du jour.
Government bills and orders for third reading. Bill 42, Appropriation Act 2025. Honourable Mr. Horner.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, the President of Treasury Board.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to move third reading of Bill 42, the Appropriation Act 2025. Last month, Budget 2025 was tabled, a plan to meet the challenges facing Alberta with responsible decisions to fund today's priorities. The budget also keeps in mind the ups and downs we've seen over the last year. We're being realistic about the risks we're facing that could impact our economy. This means keeping spending under control and directing every dollar to where it matters most. With this budget, we're bringing the message home with continued investments in education and health and lower taxes for families. We are continuing to improve safety and security in our communities while responding to border concerns. The funding allocations in Bill 42 give Albertans a much-needed tax break, secure Alberta's southern border, and boost investments in our economic future. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention supports to Albertans to meet the cost of living challenge. It's why we're cutting taxes now. With a new tax rate of 8%, 2 million Albertans will save up to $750 annually starting in 2025. Overall, the tax cut will save Albertans about $1.2 billion in 2025. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to fulfill this commitment to Albertans. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2025 makes prudent choices we need to get through these tough times. It helps Albertans today as we plan for tomorrow. I ask that all members of the House support this bill so we can support Albertans today and make sure they are supported in the future. Thank you. I move to adjourn debate.
Having heard the motion to adjourn debate, all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. That motion is carried.
Government bills and orders for third reading. Bill 43, Appropriations Supplementary Supply Act 2025. The Honourable Mr. Horner.
The Honourable President of Treasury Board and Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my privilege to rise today and move third reading of Bill 43, the Appropriation Supplementary Supply Act 2025. Bill 43 will provide authority for government to pay from the General Revenue Fund for additional costs that are not already covered or otherwise provided for during the current fiscal year. It includes $470.3 million in expense funding, $3.9 million in capital funding for the government, and $18.3 million in other financial transactions. The funding in Bill 43 will cover costs that reflect the government's commitment to strengthen and refocus our healthcare system, to keep our communities and families safe, and to protect the environment and our natural resources. I ask again that the honourable members support this bill and help the government move forward with funding Albertans' priorities. Thank you. I move to adjourn debate.
Having heard the motion to adjourn debate by the Honourable Minister of Finance and President of Treasury Board, all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. That motion is carried.
Government motions. Motion number 57, adjourn debate. Honourable Ms. Gray.
The Honourable Leader of Official Opposition has 89 minutes to speak if she so wishes. I will recognize the member from Lethbridge West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to deliver my maiden speech as MLA for Lethbridge West and greet this assembly with Oki. In Blackfoot, Oki means hello, and it's the official greeting of the city of Lethbridge. My constituency is located in Blackfoot country, the land of the Kainai, Piikani, and Siksika nations, and we are also home to the Métis of Alberta. Before continuing the speech, there are a number of people I need to thank because I definitely didn't get here on my own. To my mother, Jerry, who's 91 years young, who has aged in a way to which we should all aspire. She was much beloved as an elementary school teacher, has an active social life. She regularly travels and lives in her own home. My mom tried very hard to teach me the proper way to behave, and still tries, but has not always been successful. Sorry, Mom, I'll try to be better. I am grateful for the many road trips my mom and dad took to watch me play baseball and hockey, from Vermilion to Emerson, Manitoba, and points between. My mom has always been there for me and my sisters, and I can never repay her for all that she's given me. And to my father, Seiko, who passed away in 2005, but at times seems like he's never left. His quiet wisdom and love for family left an impression on me. He was a tin basher by trade, who had a small plumbing and heating shop. I was lucky to have worked with him, although at times it didn't feel so lucky, and to have golfed with him and to have had special meals with him, which my sisters didn't find out till much later, or maybe now. Seiko taught me to never ask someone to do a job that you weren't willing to do yourself, which I carried with me throughout my career. To my wife and partner, Erin, who has stood with me through 5 elections, provides me with the support I need and also keeps me grounded by being my most honest critic. She truly completes me and makes me whole. Erin's compassion for some of our most marginalized people is exemplified in her decades-long work with individuals with developmental disabilities, and her compassion extends to animals, as is evident in her dedication to the Humane Society. One way or another, Erin makes those around her better. To my adult children, Jessa, Brock, and Kale, and their partners, Alice, Jamie, and Kayla, and my grandchildren, Mira, Maddox, and Lyndon, who lift my spirits and bring me joy whenever we're together, and whose growth and exploration of life is a constant source of amazement and pride for me. To my sisters, Jackie, Kathy, Barbara, and Judy, for who the first couple of decades of my life were not that enamored with me. Being the only boy in a Japanese-Canadian family, I was a bit spoiled. But we've gotten closer as we've gotten older, have become supports for each other, and truly enjoy each other's company. And the bonus of having 4 sisters is that I gained brothers-in-law, Dan, Ellen, Eldon, and the late Frank, who became my brothers along the way. And to my nieces and nephews and great-nieces and great-nephews have made our extended family so much fun and interesting. Now to Erin's family, her mom and stepdad, Derek and Bill, her father Jim, and her brother Ben, and his wife Kristen, and of course their son Calder, for becoming my family as well, with whom we have shared many adventures and lived to talk about it. Their unequivocal support for me in my political life is so much appreciated. In fact, I would not be here today without Ben's help in 2 contested nominations. To Shannon Phillips, our 3-time MLA, who began to strengthen the Alberta NDP in Lethbridge West in 2011 with their small band of supporters and volunteers, building support for our party one door at a time. She was elected in 2015, 2019, and 2023 in what was formerly a Conservative stronghold and showed us that the way to win was through hard work. She has been a friend and a mentor, and I will be forever grateful for her support. To Lisa Lambert, who has worked in our constituency office for years and could well be the prototype for what a constituency associate should be. She is intelligent and engaged and is always a step ahead and knows what I need and when I need it. And in her spare time, she's the backbone for the party in Lethbridge. To our many volunteers who worked our campaigns and continue to support us, and to the many voters in Lethbridge West who have put their trust in me and honored me with this position. Mr. Speaker, I mention these people because they're the ones who shaped me and continue to do so. And as I said at the outset, I didn't get here on my own. Growing up in Tabor, well, maybe being raised is a more apt description, I was fortunate to participate in sports year-round. It was through sports that I developed lifelong friendships and learned the value of working together towards a common goal. This teamwork led to a couple of provincial championships in baseball, numerous trips to provincial finals in hockey, and as an adult, a provincial slow pitch title. Working together also became a theme throughout my adult life, and in my 40-year career as a human services professional, I've been involved in over 60 boards, committees, and working groups, not including the 15 or so groups I was involved with during my 2 terms on Lethbridge City Council. Mr. Speaker, I speak of these things to provide perspective on why, at my age, I stand before you as a first-time MLA. In retrospect, much of my life has been dominated by service to the community. My role as MLA amplifies that service and will allow me to bring issues to the public and take actions that I likely could not by any other means. I need to bring the fight about coal mining in the Eastern Slopes directly to the government in this Assembly. I need to raise awareness about the dire state of primary health system in my community in this Assembly. People in my community that are fighting for an education system that is inclusive for all students, is a safe place to learn for all students in safe buildings, a system that has an age-appropriate, developmentally appropriate curriculum, need to know that I will bring that fight to this Assembly. People in my community need to know that I will advocate for their needs regardless of their politics in this Assembly. And Mr. Speaker, the most marginalized and minimized people in my community, Indigenous people, those living in poverty, people with disabilities, newcomers, especially newcomers of color, and seniors know that I'm willing to fight for them in this Assembly. The strength of Lethbridge West is not just the University of Lethbridge, our revitalized downtown, or our thriving business community. Our strength is not just our wide variety of neighborhoods, our wonderful parks and trails system, including our amazing river valley and coulees. Our strength is the people. Our diverse population of well-established ethnic communities. I'm really proud to be one of the first Japanese Canadian and Okinawan Canadian MLAs in the country. Yeah. Combined with many newcomers from around the world, has created a dynamic that is exciting. We're home to the largest Nepali Bhutanese community in Canada. We were a leader in receiving Syrian refugees. We're experiencing a surge in residents from a number of African countries, and our community stepped up to take in many Ukrainians displaced by war. Mr. Speaker, I will do my best in this Assembly for the people of Lethbridge West. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I adjourn debate.
Having heard the motion by the honourable member from Lethbridge West to adjourn debate, all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. That motion is carried.
Under Government Bills and Orders for third reading, Bill 42. Bill 42, Appropriation Act 2025, adjourn debate. Honourable Mr. Horner.
The official government House Leader and Minister of Sport has risen.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, maybe we should have asked for this prior to going into third reading, but I do want to rise to ask for unanimous consent of the Assembly to move to 1-minute bells for the remainder of the afternoon sitting.
Having heard the motion to move for unanimous consent for 1-minute bells for the remainder of the sitting day, all those in favour, please say aye. Any opposed, please say no. Oh, yes, I will ask one question. Any opposed to moving to 1-minute bells? Hearing none, that motion is carried. So we will move to third reading Bill 42. The honourable member for Edmonton Rutherford, Riverview has.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to join the debate in third reading on Bill 42, the Appropriation Act 2025. So this, of course, is the budget bill that we've been debating and just went through budget estimates on for the last 2 weeks. And certainly myself and my colleagues have extensively questioned the ministers concerning the contents of the bill. And certainly we see it as coming up quite short, not supporting Albertans. We know that Albertans want good jobs and help with the increasing cost of living. They also want investments in public health care, public education, and public safety. Instead, in this UCP budget, we have cuts, chaos, and corruption. And I'd like to focus, Mr. Speaker, mostly on the shadow ministry that I have the honour of covering, which is seniors and community social services, specifically seniors programming, continuing care, and home care. And one of the things that right off the bat was a concern I saw in the budget, and we had foreshadowing of this in the fall session of the legislature, was the ceiling on the indexation of the Alberta Seniors Benefit. And of course, the Alberta Seniors Benefit supports extremely low-income seniors to be able to manage the high cost of living that we have certainly in our province. And we have had quite, excuse me, high rates of inflation. And besides that, too, we've had a significant growth in our population here in Alberta. We know that what is it now? It's like in the fiscal, the consumer price index was 2.6 and population growth was 2.5. And we know that that the population of seniors has increased even greater. You know, seniors are living longer, healthier lives. I will soon be a senior myself, one more year, and I'll be 65. And so I know that our population is growing significantly. And so that's a 5.1% increase. Yet the Alberta Seniors Benefit has a ceiling of only 2%. And so seniors are not getting the supports they need just to stay in the same place. And so that is obviously missing in the budget. Another significant issue is there was investment in the previous fiscal year in seniors community grants, yet $1,600,000 of those community grants were not allocated. They were left in the budget. And this is like shocking, really, because we know that the needs in the community far outstrip the investments. I meet regularly with nonprofit agencies all across the province that serve seniors, that do preventative work. And you know what they're telling me now, Mr. Speaker? They're telling me that a lot of that preventative work they can't do anymore because they have to deal with the basic needs of seniors. So what they're doing is opening food banks because people don't have enough income to be able to feed themselves. And this food insecurity didn't used to be an issue, but it's growing amongst the seniors population. And so they have to divert a lot of their services to that, start different programs. And of course, Mr. Speaker, we know that affordable housing in our province is very difficult to come by. We have seniors in the homeless population, which is extremely disturbing, that we're not respecting and supporting seniors to live in dignity in our province. And it's certainly very disturbing to me to know that that kind of investment, those kind of supports aren't there. And many of these agencies across the province that support seniors would focus on supporting people with recreational and social programming, which is vital. We know that social isolation isn't just sort of a good thing to do to, get together with your friends and that's kind of a nice thing. It's much more than that, because we know health outcomes for seniors who are isolated means they deteriorate. And so these kind of programs mean seniors' mental health and physical health is much better. Yet, in this line item in the budget, there was $1,600,000 that the government did not allocate. Like, what's going on? Why would the minister leave that much money on the table and not support seniors? That money and much, much more could have helped seniors in our province. So I ask, the government, why is that not being done? We also know very much that besides the Alberta Seniors Benefit that's not being indexed to inflation, we know that, more than a year ago, the Minister of Seniors and Community Social Services appointed advisory committee to look at the seniors lodge program in our province, which is an important program. And sadly, it's been underfunded for many years. But he asked this advisory committee to work together to create a seniors lodge modernization program, which is great. That's great. And he said they'll be done their work in the spring, and he allocated $25 million in the previous budget to actually do that work, based on the outcome of the report. And so I know that the report was complete by May of 2024. What have we heard? Nothing. And guess what? Just like the $1,600,000 in community grants that was not spent, this $25 million wasn't spent. So I'm wondering, this is the minister's own initiative. Why is he delaying on this when there is such a significant need in the seniors community all across Alberta that we need to have, this revitalization moving forward? People are not having the services they need in the community. But again, that was something that it was just forgotten, it seemed. So I'm wondering what the minister, why money is being left and not allocated and not supported. And so that's another huge issue with the budget. Another thing is that there is some specific, certainly in the annual report year after year, there's some seniors groups that are more vulnerable than others. And, they were explicitly identified as seniors that are newcomers, seniors that are Indigenous, and seniors from the Pride community. But this year, that's, expunged. It's disappeared. There's nothing about these vulnerable groups. And I'm just wondering why that has been taken out, and why is that not a focus anymore? Because those populations really do need a lot of support. So I know, Mr. Speaker, my colleagues have much to say about the budget, and we don't have much time this afternoon, so I just wanted to get those comments on the record to let people know that this budget could have been so much better, and how much the UCP government is not doing what they need to invest in seniors in our province. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well said.
Any others wishing to speak? The member for Edmonton Gold Bar.
Glenora.
No, sorry.
That's all
Edmonton,
good.
Glenora, my bad.
No worries. You can make it up by spending money in Glenora this next week. You're back instead of Gold Bar. To support our good local businesses. I want to take some time this afternoon to just go over some of my high-level concerns and hopes as we consider the budget here today. I want to start by acknowledging all of the work of public sector workers in going into preparing for this budget, and I'm sure that there are many hours of work are appreciated by all members of this Assembly. However, what I will say is that the job of the public service is to implement the how. Government's job is to determine the what. And what we are considering today is not a good budget, Mr. Speaker. If we were just to population-proof and inflation-proof just the health and social service sectors, that's it. So organizations that address housing, as my colleague from Edmonton Riverview has just identified, healthcare sector supports, we would have $776 million more in just those two areas. And that is approximately the amount of money that has been to question through the corrupt care allegations and scandal that are absolutely a part of this budget as we are considering the next fiscal year, Mr. Speaker. So $750 million that should be put into making sure that we are at least maintaining the level of services that we're providing to the people of Edmonton, Glenora, and all Albertans, Mr. Speaker, would be I would expect the bare minimum from a government. I also want to acknowledge the framing and the timing in which the former infrastructure minister resigned and his acknowledgement that there were large and widespread inconsistencies in departments throughout government. Inconsistencies, I think, is a gentle way of saying money that is not properly accounted for. So, Mr. Speaker, with that in mind, it brings the entire integrity of this budget into question. We know that health has been at the heart of some of these corrupt care allegations, and Mr. Speaker, it's for good reason. And the biggest reason is that I think every single Albertan should have peace of mind that they will get the care that they need when and where they need it, and that certainly hasn't been the case. We've been seeing large increases to the closures of emergency rooms and sometimes entire wings of hospitals, especially in rural Alberta. And folks in Alberta, I think, deserve so much better. I think about the people who live in the Speaker's riding, for example, having to drive further and further to give birth or not knowing if their emergency department will be open when they need it on the weekends. That is something that I know that the government members didn't campaign on, but it is something that this budget in no way will work to remedy so that we can have confidence that we'll be able to show up in an emergency department and get the care that we need when and where we need it. We also know that through recent court documents that have been tabled that it's alleged that the government was directing Alberta Health Services to cut 1,900 frontline healthcare worker positions in the province of Alberta. Now, this number itself isn't in the budget, but the fact that the budget hasn't been inflation-proofed or increased for population is in black and white in the budget documents. And these court documents allege that it works out to 1,900 Alberta Health Services employees. And that's not employees that'll move from one pillar to another pillar or one letterhead to another letterhead. These types of things have been investments made by the government that I don't think reflect what I used to anticipate as fiscally conservative, spending millions of dollars on a rebranding exercise. We asked specifically about the brand and the logos for the 4 new pillars, and this is one question where the minister did allow public servants to come forward and answer that question at the mic, and we were told that it's $1.6 million. And that it's really important that people know who it is that's providing their care. Well, Mr. Speaker, I know when I had to call 911 when I was up in Canuso a couple of years ago, I didn't care what the ambulance said on the side of it. I cared that an ambulance showed up and that that ambulance could take the person I was worried about to a hospital nearby. And I think it doesn't matter if you live in rural or urban Alberta, you want to make sure that you've got a paramedic who's well-trained, well-rested, and ready to respond in a crisis. You want to make sure that you've got a family doctor who can see you in a timely manner. I get letters almost every day, Mr. Speaker, from people telling me that they used to be able to get in to see their doctor quickly, and now they're waiting a month or longer. And I have many more that tell me that they don't have access to a family doctor. It's almost 1 million Albertans in this province who don't have access to a family doctor right now, Mr. Speaker. And while I appreciate that there is an amending agreement, want to commend the Alberta Medical Association for their patience and persistence in working with this government to make that happen, the budget line item for primary care is actually not going up. In fact, it's going down. So the amending agreement, which is supposed to result in family physicians being compensated at higher levels, but that line item going down, either means that we're not going to be paying them for everything that they've provided in the past, or that we're going to have fewer of them. Either way, it's not good news for the people of Alberta. And I'd be remiss if I didn't touch just briefly, Mr. Speaker, on education, another pillar of a strong democracy. And we just saw this government stand by while months workers in Fort McMurray and Edmonton, and then many workers across other parts of the province as well, including Leduc and Morinville and Calgary, went on strike fighting for better opportunities to be able to pay their bills and better working conditions. I am glad that they appear to have all reached deals, the ones that were out so far, and I call on this government to do more to address affordability. We could do things in this budget or in other bills to address insurance costs, to address electricity costs, to address rent increase costs. The government hasn't shown that courage in the bills that we've considered in this place. So those workers are absolutely going to need more money, public sector workers, to be able to pay their bills when government's allowing those to increase at such record rates. So those are the things that I wanted to highlight as we consider the budget. And the last thing I'll say is that there used to be a practice, Mr. Speaker, in budget debate where every question that was asked got answered. And there has been a large divergence from that practice over the years, and particularly with the use of block time. 10 questions will get asked and 1 speech will be given in response. And it is, I would say, a disservice to democracy when we don't share information back and forth, because part of the opposition's job is to hold the government to account, and the other part is to be able to communicate to the public about what's happening. And we don't get answers to very basic questions that we're asking in estimates. It makes it hard for us to explain what the government's doing. Even basic things, when we ask about how many hours were emergency departments closed in Alberta in this last fiscal year, and what are you doing in this upcoming fiscal year to turn that trend backwards? When we ask why is it that the government stopped reporting in the annual reports and in the budget documents around targets on Indigenous life expectancy and infant mortality, things that used to be standard practice. When we don't even get answers from the government on those things, it makes it really difficult for us to trust that the government's acting in everyone's best interest and that the process is one that's emboldening good decision making. So with that, I'll cede the remainder of my time and ask for everyone's consideration on those important questions as we move forward. Thank you.
Any others wishing to speak? The member for Edmonton City Centre.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to stand and speak at third reading of Bill 42, the Appropriation Act, looking at the monies that are being allocated in the current budget. Now, Mr. Speaker, a number of times today, we heard the honourable government leaders stand in this House and declare loudly that doing nothing is not a strategy. But sadly, Mr. Speaker, that seems to be precisely what this government's strategy is in this year's budget on so many issues that are challenges for Albertans. This government is choosing to do nothing to help Albertans. I think about education, Mr. Speaker. The number of parents I have had write to me, the number of teachers I have had reach out to me about the state of our classrooms, the overcrowding that we are seeing. Now, this government makes big promises about building schools and steps it's going to take years down the road, but there is nothing in this budget that is going to make a difference in any classroom in this province in the next 12 months. we're going to continue to see the kinds of pressures, the kinds of stresses that parents are seeing. My colleague from Edmonton Beverly Clearview spoke about education workers. And you know, she was heckled by the Minister of Energy, who was shouting, well, what about oil and gas workers? They are absolutely important, Mr. Speaker. But this government seems to focus on one section of workers because that minister, Mr. Speaker, had nothing to offer for the educational support workers in his constituency who were working for barely minimum wage. Hadn't seen a raise in decades. That minister didn't care or did not seem to act in a manner that showed care for them. There's nothing in this budget that's going to make a difference there. This government is choosing to do nothing about the dire state of things in advanced education. Just this morning, I had a chance to meet with student leaders at MacEwan University here in my constituency. I heard again about the dire state for students who are struggling to pay tuition, working multiple jobs, often having to drop courses in order to take on more work, and then guess what, Mr. Speaker? Under this government's decisions, that means they then are all of a sudden no longer eligible for student financing. There's nothing in this budget that makes things better for those students. There's no strategy, no plan from this government. Those students who are struggling with increasing food insecurity, this government has no plans to help them. There is nothing in this budget. There's nothing in this budget. This government is doing nothing to help Albertans who live with a disability. In fact, they are making their life materially worse, Mr. Speaker. Albertans on AISH, Albertans living with a disability, have now suddenly had the opportunity after years of advocacy to gain an extra $200 a month. Not much, Mr. Speaker, certainly less than these government MLAs awarded themselves in a raise. But this government is clawing that amount back. There's nothing in this budget that helps make up that gap, that helps those individuals who are struggling to pay their bills, struggling to pay for food, struggling to pay for the essential supplies that they require to live a life of dignity. This budget does nothing to help them. This budget does nothing to help parents who have children who live with a disability, who are struggling with supports in schools, who struggled for multiple months. The answer from the Minister of Education, Mr. Speaker, was to say, well, those students don't have to go to school for a while. That's not support, Mr. Speaker. There's nothing in this budget that improves that access to services. We had a private member's bill brought in here forcing a new employee into an independent office of the legislature because a member said parents cannot access the supports and help they need, and they need support and navigation. This budget would have been the place to correct that, Mr. Speaker. Not by forcing a government appointment into the Office of the Child Youth Advocate. But this budget does nothing to provide additional funding, to end the backlog, to provide more supports for those families in school or at home. I dare say, Mr. Speaker, there's not really going to be anything in this budget that's going to improve the situation for health care in our province. So is there spending? Yes. Is there increased spending? Yes. Does it actually meet population growth and inflation? No. So while this government is spending millions on consultants, while they are signing bloated contracts for their friends, there's little in this budget, I'd say nothing in this budget, that's going to make a material difference in actually getting Albertans access to care in a timely way. So this government says doing nothing is not a strategy, but it sure seems to be a strategy that they implement a lot. So I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, I will be voting against this budget because Albertans deserve a government that's actually doing something about the things that matter to them, not charging them to send the Premier to a $1,500 far-right fundraiser in Florida. A government that's actually focused on Albertans' needs and not its own. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Edmonton Meadows.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure to speak to the Bill 42 Appropriation Act on behalf of my constituents, but not as pleasure as I'm seeing this, the details of this bill, what this is offering to Albertans. And specifically, when I'm looking at thinking about all those requests and complaints from my constituents and the people who are walking into my office, or either people who are writing to my office from within my constituency and the people from across the province. So the biggest issue, the health care, it does nothing to help solve problem in healthcare crisis we are going through since 2019, since the UCP took the office in this province. I heard a story from my constituent last week who went to visit the Greenlands Hospital and gave up after 7 hours of this time and walked back home with no hope that he will get his turn to see the doctor, but ended up coming back again. So that's kind of situation, that's what the people were expecting, the types of issue this budget will address. But we see none of those concerns being addressed in this issue. And to date, government could not explain the cancellation of Edmonton South Hospital. The Premier bragged about that. Red Deer is only an hour and a half away from South Edmonton. That was actually insulting Edmontonians and Albertans. They are facing that challenge. Like, I can go on and on. I was invited by the doctor to visit one of the hospital. The kind of deficit they have been experiencing around the repair and lacking the equipment and the other stuff in hospitals. I even said, like, that will jeopardize your job. Like, why do you want to do it? He said, like, who cares? I might leave this job anyway. We are not working under working conditions. I wanted to show you politicians what is happening here. None of those concerns and issues are addressed under this budget. While I was discussing estimates, budget estimates, I got a call from my constituent living across the street from the school, that his kid was not being admitted to the school that was across the street from his place, because school is already full. There's no capacity in that school. And government made big announcement in September last year about maybe something for 50 next years. Nothing is on the ground. You can see and you can tell your constituents and the people, they can believe like there will be something better. In the near future, no, not under this government, not under this budget. Per capita funding, lowest in the country. Schools are running over capacity. And I don't have one call, I have no answers to those people, except I can just only call. I write to the ministry anytime I get that kind of complaint, right away I just forward those complaints to the ministry. They should be aware of this. But unfortunately, I cannot provide further help to those constituents under this UCP government that doesn't understand the crisis. Further, their actions are making it worse, the bad situation worse. So more of this, what will happen, Albertans are going to see the higher insurance rates. 7.5% increase this year and 7.5% increase next year, 15%. Higher premium that government is legislating, deliberately downloading cost on Albertans. And utilities cost of utilities are skyrocketing under this UCP government. They removed the price cap, cost cap when they came in power in 2019. The prices increased more than fourfold. 400% from 6.5 cents to 32 cents even sometime. And I got a call from constituents. He was desperate. He was struggling to pay the bills. He called the company. They said, if you can't pay the bill, just use your hoodie. And that is what is happening under this government. And that is not just recent, that is happening for the last 4 or 5 years. And education property rates, that is government deliberately downloading cost to the municipalities, cities. They're already struggling to pick up their cost due to City of Edmonton. Their grants and their programs were cut by this government nearly $100 million a year. And Albertans are picking up that cost. And same time, we have the lowest wage in the country. When this government came in power in 2019, we were nearly across the line of like high minimum wage provinces. But today, after 6 years of this government in Alberta, we have the lowest minimum wage in the country and the highest inflation rate. So looking at all those details, Mr. Speaker, I cannot support this budget. I will be voting against this budget. Thank you.
Are there any others wishing to speak? Member for Edmonton Castle Downs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm standing today to speak to Bill 42, the Appropriation Act 2025. Unfortunately, the budget reflects what we've seen with this government: complete chaos, corruption, and not surprisingly, a lot of cuts. There's a lot that was asked in estimates. There's a lot that's been asked of this government. There's been a lot of pleading about what can be done to fix this. Unfortunately, the government isn't listening, and they're continuing their hard line of not improving lives of Albertans. The budget fails to deliver on any priorities that Albertans are looking at. They want to see security and jobs in the economy. They want to make sure that cost of living is affordable. They want a strong public healthcare system. They want a strong public education system and public safety. That's what Albertans want. This budget doesn't address any of that. It cuts a lot of those services that every Albertan relies on every day. And for that, Mr. Speaker, I can't support this budget. Thank you.
Any others wishing to speak? If not, I will call on the Minister of Finance, President of Treasury Board, to close debate.
Sure, just quickly, Mr. Speaker. Bill 42. This is a great budget for Alberta. Not saying that it isn't without its challenges. It's a challenging time, obviously, but when I look at this budget, I see a credible budget. I see a government that brought the threat of tariffs actually into the baseline assumptions for the year. Only one other province has followed suit. I see record investments in healthcare, education, social services, still coming off 4.4% population growth. The only thing that I see that this budget is missing is a path to balance, and that's the work that this entire House will have to do going forward. This has been on the floor of this House for a month. I don't think I've taken one question from the opposition about the fact that it's a $5.2 billion deficit. You would think that would be a question worth asking. I would be happy to answer. Maybe they don't want to throw shade because it's smaller than any budget they ever tabled. That may be wise. But this is responsible. This meets the needs of Albertans. It's the right budget for right now. We're proud of it. I would recommend everyone in the House vote in favor of it. It's the right budget for right now.
The Honourable Honourable President, Treasury Board and Minister of Finance has moved third reading of Bill 42, the Appropriation Act 2025. Those in favour of the motion for third reading, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. No. That motion is carried and a division has been called.
Members, a division has been called on third reading of Bill 42, Appropriation Act 2025. All those in favor, please rise.
The Honourable Mr. Sigurdsson, the Honourable Mr. Nicolaides, the Honourable Ms. Schultz, the Honourable Mr. Williams, the Honourable Mr. Glubish, the Honourable Minister LaGrange, the Honourable Mr. Horner, the Honourable Mr. Scow, the Honourable Mr. Ellis, the Honourable Mr. Amory, the Honourable Mr. Newdorf, the Honourable Mr. Lowen, the Honourable Mr. Wilson, the Honourable Mr. Jean, the Honourable Mr. Dreesian, the Honourable Mr. Nixon, Mr. Wright, Mr. Rosewell, the Honourable Mr. Turton, the Honourable Mr. Yassine, the Honourable Mr. McIver, the Honourable Ms. Furr, the Honourable Mr. Jones, the Honourable Mrs. Sawney, Mr. Getson, the Honourable Mr. Nally, the Honourable Mr. Long, the Honourable Mr. Hunter, Mr. Yao, Mr. Stephan, Mr. Van Dyken, Ms. Pitt, the Honourable Mr. Guthrie, Mr. Sear, Mrs. Johnson, Mr. Boychenko, Mr. McDougall, Mrs. Petrovic, Mr. Lunty, Mr. Dick, the Honourable Ms. Armstrong-Homenuk, Ms. DeYoung, Mr. Bouchard, Mr. Singh, Ms. Lovely.
All those opposed, please rise.
The Honourable Ms. Gray, Member Haji, the Honourable Mr. Sabir, the Honourable Member Hoffman, Member Callaghan Stonehouse, the Honourable Mr. Egan, Mr. Ellingson, Mr. Shepherd, Ms. Wright, Member Brar, Member Irwin, Ms. Renault, the Honourable Mr. Schmidt, the Honourable Ms. Sigurdsson, Ms. Goring, Mr. Diol, Mr. Dack.
Mr. Speaker, total for the motion 45, total against 17.
Motion is carried and so ordered.
Bill 42, Appropriation Act 2025 is now read a third time. Under Government Bills and Orders for third reading, Bill 43, Appropriation Supplementary Supply Act 2025. Adjourned debate, Honourable Mr. Horner.
Honourable members, are there others? The Honourable Member for Edmonton McClung has risen to join in the debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Very pleased to rise today and proudly display a Canadian flag on my chest, along with others who are wearing ties on this side of the House, to firmly stand up for Canada and speak to this appropriation Bill 43, which, of course, is an act that is one of supplementary supply. And we speak to these bills every year, Mr. Speaker, because, of course, government will need some extra funds to satisfy the needs of each ministry that may have had unexpected contingencies come up during the year, the fiscal year. And of course, this is a fundamental principle of our Westminster parliamentary democracy, which differentiates us in many respects from, as you will know, Mr. Speaker, from the republic to the south, which is incessantly seeming to go to the brink of having the government being unfunded and shut right down, because they don't have this system of supplementary supply, which allows us to continue funding government programs even though budgets may have run out during the fiscal year. We have the supplementary supply system, which works better. So I'll leave it to those who are interested in researching that more in depth to find out why that benefits us here, and why it's such a deficiency in the United States and other republics which have had to go to the wire on a regular basis and nearly have their government shut down because they don't have the funds to operate. But what I wanted to address my comments to this afternoon, Mr. Speaker, were a particular part of the Appropriation Supplementary Supply Act 2025, and that had to do with the healthcare budget, Mr. Speaker, specifically on line item 5.2 on page 35. It speaks about the working together on shared health priorities, bilateral 3-year program agreement between the provincial government and the federal government, which provided $285 million for 24-25 fiscal year. And the funding was intended to expand health-based care and enhance virtual care, to reduce wait times for CT scans and MRIs, and accelerate and secure digital health services. So the point I want to focus on this afternoon, Mr. Speaker, is the fact that this funding, this $285 million funding under the Working Together on Shared Health Priorities, was intended to specifically reduce wait times for CT scans and MRIs. And this is something I've spoken to in this House numerous times, including with previous Health Minister, Mr. Copping, before the last election. And the issue arose because of concerns in my constituency, particularly at the Misericordia Hospital, Mr. Speaker, of the lack of funding available to provide new CT scanners for that hospital, including for the new emergency ward which was built, emergency department which was built as a result of our government's decision to move ahead with that as a necessary healthcare improvement. However, unfortunately, that new emergency ward, including the whole hospital, Misericordia Hospital, is forced to rely upon an old CT scanner which breaks down regularly. It hasn't for a while. But the last time it was out of service for about 5 weeks in February of 2023, I believe it was. And it is a hospital that serves a much wider community than just the Edmonton region. And CT scanner serves areas up north, far as Westlock and even further, Mr. Speaker. And so indeed, what I want to make sure that the minister knows is that the expectation is that part of this $285 billion will be spent on CT scanners, not only at the Misericordia, but other hospitals throughout the Edmonton region, and perhaps elsewhere in Alberta, because from my experience recently with the Misericordia Hospital, there's a dire need for diagnostic equipment, including CT scanners, and particularly at the Cross Cancer Institute as well, where I've had occasion recently to have recently taken close family members there for diagnostic imaging. The oncologists there will tell you that the equipment is running on a broken shoestring over at the Cross Cancer Institute. They really need upgraded machinery, diagnostic equipment, such as CT scanners, PET scanners, MRIs. And this fund of $285 million would go a long way to helping them do that. You don't want to see hospitals having to dip into their foundation funds or ask a foundation to fund medical equipment that is absolutely essential, such as CT scanners. They're only $2 to $3 million a piece. That sounds like a lot, but out of $285 million, you could buy CT scanners for every hospital in the province and have some change left over. So I really hope that this money will be used to fulfill its intended purpose and make sure that the diagnostic imaging equipment that is so badly needed throughout the province, especially in areas like my own riding of Edmonton-McClung with the Misericordia Hospital and then further into the Cross Cancer Institute, so that Albertans are properly served and have timely diagnoses to help prevent stage 4 cancer developing as a result of an early diagnosis at stage 1. Thank you.
Any others wishing to speak? I'll recognize the member for Edmonton Decor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I spoke about this yesterday, and I will highlight some of the things that I hoped to see in these supplementary adjustments. Albertans have been very clear about what their priorities are. You will expect, if this has not been captured in the budget in 2024, 2025, you'll expect that in the supplementary, these are some of the factors that will be taken into consideration. So jobs and economic stability is a key priority for Albertans. One of the key areas that the ministry has identified, or the government's strategic document highlights, is investment when it comes to workforce building. It's an investment in the area of childcare. So I'll speak to that. The other piece that I hoped to see in the supplementary is affordability and cost of living and how that could be tackled in the supplementary budget. Unfortunately, I don't see that. My colleague from Edmonton-McClung just talked about the public health care and some of the areas where the supplementary budget is not addressing around access to family physicians, strengthening primary health care, and addressing some of the bilateral agreements that have been alluded in there. So going back to the jobs and economic stability and government's strategic vision around investment in the workforce, which is childcare. So on page 47 of the supplementary document, it requests for $91.6 million with an additional $15 million made available from lower than the budgeted expenses in other programs to provide a total of $107 million for affordable and quality childcare program. And high quality childcare program requires well-trained workforce. Proper quality childcare programs require well-paid workforce. And as we know, childcare workers are predominantly women, predominantly single moms, predominantly underpaid, predominantly struggle when it comes to the cost of living. So I would have hoped to see an increase in terms of allocation when it comes to investment into the workforce in the childcare. So this doesn't provide that, and when I highlight the areas around wage stagnation, underpayments, and all of those kind of things around childcare providers, on average, a worker in the childcare spaces, and let's not forget, this is the government's workforce investment priority when it comes to this strategic plan document. So an average childcare worker makes $36,000 annually. 21,000 of that is tax exempt, so it's not taxed. So if you calculate, I was hoping that the new budget will also provide some affordability relief. The government talks a lot about 750. It's the higher number, but I will use the average number. 36,000, somebody who makes that will be saving, with the tax bracket, new tax bracket will be saving 83 cents per day. That is not how you tackle affordability, and that is not how you invest in your workforce when you see that this is the amount that they are making. So this fails. And the other, quickly, I will add that the ministry has removed the low-income subsidy for childcare while implementing a flight trade fee. So why doesn't this funding plan to subsidies to ensure low-income families who cannot afford the flight fee can still access higher quality childcare? And this is where the supplementary budget fails to meet key priorities for Albertans, specifically on affordability and specifically on well-paying jobs. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any others wishing to speak? Seeing none, I will call on Minister of Finance and President of Treasury Board to close debate. Minister has waived that. And so we will move directly to a vote. Having heard the motion from the Honourable President of Treasury Board and Minister of Finance, has moved third reading of Bill 43 Appropriation Supplementary Supply Act 2025. All those in favour of the motion for third reading, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Please say no. No. That motion is carried.
Bill 43, Appropriation Supplementary Supply Act 2025 is now read a third time.
Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, through you, to all members of the Assembly for your tireless work for the last week. I wish you all a prosperous constituency break, meeting with those who elected us to be in this chamber. But with that said, I move to adjourn the Assembly until 1:30 p.m. Monday, April 7th, 2025.
Having heard the motion from the Honourable Government House Leader, all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. That motion is carried. Sorry, the House stands adjourned until 1:30 April 7th.